our language, is exclusively ours, but the language that we regard as ours. And so, of course, it's a great pleasure, joking aside, to be here. I do think teaching is the single most important profession there is. And I'm not just saying that because you're teachers. I can't think of a single profession that is more important than teaching. And I don't think it's appropriately rewarded, either in my country and possibly not in this country, but you absolutely have my admiration for what you're all doing.
Like collaborate, this kind of thing, collusion, and then you've got ligare, meaning bind or tie. And originally, outside of an English language context, colligation basically came to mean this binding or tying together of things, make it a bit more concrete. Say you take these kind of verbs of perception, things like hear or notice or see or watch. They all have certain grammatical patterns that go with them that are kind of repetitive and familiar, and maybe that work differently in your languages. So you often get these verbs, then there's an object, there's often then an ing clause, and after that there's often an adverbial of time or an adverbial of place. So you get things like, hey, I heard you coming in last night at 3 o'clock in the morning, you woke me up. Yeah, I noticed him hanging around outside the house. I thought it was weird. I heard someone screaming outside, so I called the police. Oh, I saw him playing live when I was in Belgrade last year. And when you become a fluent speaker, native or non-native, you learn these patterns, possibly intuitively. Like the ambassador was saying, you know, if you grow up as a native speaker, you're probably not conscious of the fact you're using the language in that way, but you are. And when you suddenly hear foreign students using the words in the way that, you know, you understand them, but the grammatical patterns that go with those words working differently, you start to realise, maybe it works differently in your language. Maybe you grammar the word differently in your language. Okay? It's a very common noun. It's among the most 500 frequent nouns in English. The main meaning is this: the event, thing or person that makes something happen. And this meaning of cause operates with a particular grammatical pattern, with particular colligations. So it's often used with the preposition of, it's often used with definite articles, with the, and it's often followed by an extra noun or a noun phrase. So you see things like, the main cause of these accidents is drivers going too fast on that bit of the road. I have to write an essay on the causes of the First World War, okay? You take a different meaning of cause, like the third most frequent meaning, which is a kind of an aim or an organisation or a group that you think brings something beneficial to society. This meaning of cause works completely differently. It's usually found at the end of sentences, usually with indefinite or zero articles, and usually with a wider range of prepositions. So you see things like, it's all in a good cause, I'm not very sympathetic to their cause, it's for a worthy cause. You think of the problems that your students have with articles. I mean, it's one of the last things that most students ever get right. I was in St. Petersburg last year and I met a teacher who said, I always insist that my students learn the 89 rules of article use. I have a handout prepared. It's like, wow, your students must really enjoy reading through that. You know how to enjoy yourself in your classes. The problem is, I think, even if you think there are 89 rules of article use, it doesn't help you with things like this, because different meanings of the same word colligate differently with articles. One meaning of cause has the, another meaning of cause doesn't have the. You know, this is like rule 9642 or something. You can never learn this stuff just by reading through rules. It doesn't work like that. But I think what it does mean is, when you're listening to English or when you're reading English, part of the way in which you decode, part of the way in which you understand, that's what this word means here is. Because somewhere inside you, you've absorbed this understanding of, okay, when I see cause at the end of a sentence without a definite article not followed by of, it means this kind of cause. When I see cause with the cause of something, it means this kind of cause. That's just part of what we all absorb when we're learning about how words work. One thing is just recognizing and accepting that different meanings of the same word collocate differently, but they also have different grammatical patterns. And this grammar is grammar that's outside what we traditionally think of as grammar in English language teaching. When you ask most teachers or students, what do you mean by grammar? They probably hold up Raymond Murphy's English grammar in use and say, it's all in here. And I think generally when we think about grammar, we think of, the present perfect continuous, the future perfect, the third conditional, passives, modals, this kind of thing. And, of course, that is grammar. But I think a lot of the time, what makes learning a language really hard for students is the way in which individual words that they understand grammar in the different language. And this idea that different meanings of words pattern differently, and that this can't be resolved by photocopying another page of Murphy's and giving it to students as homework. That's not going to solve these problems. I don't know if you had this experience yourself. When I talk to students and ask them, how do you feel about your English? Even really, really good students, the main thing they say is a bit like the ambassador was saying, is, I know a lot of vocabulary, I know words, I worry about my grammar. And just a couple of obvious examples, okay? Classic foreign student bits of English. I am agreeing, okay? It is depend on my girlfriend. I mean, obviously in these sentences, the students have studied the present simple, okay? They've already done the present simple. They know the word I and agree. They know the word depend, my girlfriend. They're expressing the idea perfectly competently. And I don't think these are grammatical errors in the traditional way we think about grammatical errors. They're not like saying, I have been there last week, okay? They're different sorts of errors. They're to do with the micro-grammar of the word agree, or the micro-grammar of the word depend. They're to do with the collocations. And this happens all the time with foreign students, I think, when they're speaking in a foreign language. They express the ideas quite competently, but they grammar the words in the same way as those words work in their first language. And I don't know for you guys, if you think about your first languages, I don't know if you would say, I am agree. Yes. Yeah? Okay. Why does it work like that in one language, but in another language it doesn't work like that? Who knows? Okay? There's no logic to that. For students, it's a frustration. That's good. You can't check whether my Polish is correct or not. I've been assured these are 3 perfectly correct sentences in Polish. I only found out this because my Polish student said these things. My father, he wants that I study law. Okay? It is cold to me. How does she look? She's got these eyes in the front of her head. She uses those to look. With these kind of things, the problem isn't that the student doesn't know the vocabulary. It isn't that they haven't studied the present simple. It's that they're translating literally the grammatical patterns that go with those words into English. So, in English it would be, he wants me to study law. Yeah? Why? Because that's the colligation of the verb want in English. It's cold to me. Well, it's cold. I'm cold. It's freezing. I'm freezing. What does she look like? Not how does she look. Okay? And with all of those, again, I think the students will perceive those as, I need more grammar. And as teachers, there's a temptation to kind of say, okay, well, we'll do the present simple again next week for the 87th time. It's not going to stop these kind of problems from happening. I think part of what it means we need to think about as teachers is showing the students, yes, I understand what you mean, but in English they don't work that way, they colligate differently. And maybe adding a few extra examples, you decide how much time you have, you decide how much feedback on written homework you want to give. But I think it means providing students with a little bit of extra evidence to slowly kind of break down the first language conditioning and help students to notice how the second language works differently. Showing them how the patterns differ from one language to another language. And I think for you guys, where you're working in monolingual situations where you share a first language with your students, you have a huge advantage. You often hear kind of praise of the idea of being a native speaker. The problem with being a native speaker a lot of the time is we're generally quite monolingual, okay? Or we're monolingual, or we speak other languages, but we're teaching multilingual classes of students. If you're teaching students that you share a first language with, you'll know intuitively, in your blood, in your bones, the kinds of mistakes that your students are going to make because you've been there. You know, you're aware of, there's that trap here that the students are going to fall into. It takes me years to learn, okay, so in Japanese, that meaning of that is always passive. Okay, that's useful to know. You know that intuitively. You know, you've just got that as part of your teaching DNA. I think when you're thinking about correction like this, where you're feeding back, you're showing how the patterns differ, and you're adding a little bit of extra context, it takes longer. It's more work on our part. But it makes students aware of how the language that they're trying to speak is different from the way in which they're trying to express themselves. It's kind of, I don't know if any of you have seen that thing with the London Underground about mind the gap. You know, when you're kind of getting on the train and they tell you, try not to fall underneath the train if you're drunk, basically. You know, watch out for that little gap between the platform and the train. It's a way of helping students to mind the gap, to become aware of the fact that L2 isn't just L1 directly translated. It also means that the students get this chance to learn better ways of saying what they're trying to say. So they've got a teacher who's listening to them saying, yeah, I know what you mean. That's normally said like this in English. Why? Because it's normally said like this in English. It's just the way it is. And it means that over time, if we're doing more of this kind of listening, reformulating, showing students how to say what they're trying to say better, over time they get this exposure to grammatically complex ways of saying things that they wouldn't get if we're just listening going, yeah, I know what you mean. But it's not grammar in the way in which we're often trained to think about grammar. It's not grammar in the way that course books often present grammar. It's not grammar that you find in Raymond Murphy's English Grammar in Use. I think what it also means is when we are teaching vocabulary ourselves, okay, and we're thinking about what can we tell students about how words work, we need to be thinking about more than just the meaning.